2020. I am Gary Sutton, and glad that you could join us this morning. Martin McKenzie back in the studio. This story has been a hot one, and we wanted to get to it. It started about a week ago this past Sunday with regard to a young lady, a 19-year-old girl, Anita Shaffer, who was stopped in Red Lion on what appeared to be a routine traffic stop, checking a brake light that was out. Ultimately, it led to some questions about the dark tint on windows, and ultimately was asked to get out of the car, was asked questions about whether or not she was on drugs or alcohol along that way. And we thought it would be good to maybe get the story from her and also her dad, who happens to be a mechanic who checked the light when she got home. We're talking about Anita Shaffer and Neil Shaffer, who joined us this morning here on WSBA. Good morning to both of you. How are you today? Neil, it's good to have you on, and I know Anita is there with you as well. Anita, good morning to you. Wanted to, you obviously this has stirred up a lot of interest, not only in the state, but also it's a national story now. Take us through the stop, if you would, Anita, and tell us exactly what happened on that day a week ago this past Sunday.
Okay, well, I was just going out for a drive, and I was circling on my way home, going through Yo, and I passed two cops who were stopped at Strobeck's. As soon as I went past them, they pulled out, and I was like, oh, no. I already knew how this was going to go. So I was heading up into Red Lion, and I went to go pull onto a street, and that's when they turned their lights on. They pulled me over. He came up, and he was like, are you aware why I pulled you over today? And I was like, no, not really. He was like, well, for one, you have a tail light or a brake light out. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, your tint is a little dark. And I was like, yeah, I figured this would happen at some point. And then he asked what I was doing, like where I was going. And I said I was just kind of out for a drive. And then he asked me if I was aware of the stay-at-home act that's in place. And I said, yeah, I'm aware of it being in place. I just didn't know that it pertained to, like, just going out for a drive.
Okay.
And at the time, my car was having a transmission problem. So as I was sitting there in park, it was idling. It was kind of shaking. So, and then I was nervous on top of it, so my voice was kind of shaking. And he asked me if I was under the influence of any drugs, if I had taken any prescription medications that day, or if I had been drinking. And I said no. He continued to pull me out of my vehicle to perform some tests. He had me sit on the cop car. He shined a light into my eyes. And around that time is when the second cop left. He had been there up to this point the whole time.
Did he say anything during this time at all, the second policeman?
No, he didn't say anything.
So now you're at a point where they're shining the light in your eyes or checking to see if you've taken any prescription drugs or not prescription drugs, I would assume. And I really don't want to assume anything in this. I just want to get your story. And so what happens next?
Well, after he completed the examination, he had me get back in the car. He took my license and registration, ran it, gave it back, and then he gave me my citation and my fine for being out and about while the act's in place.
Did the citation, and I've seen the citation, but I noticed that the citation did not have anything on about the broken light or anything about the tinted glass. Am I correct on that, or was there something on there that I missed?
No, it was just for being out and driving while the act is in place.
Okay. And so you said about he kind of pulled you out of your car. Did you get out of the car on your own at that particular point when he said you pulled you out of your car? I mean, I'm assuming he verbally told you to get out of the car. Is that the way it worked?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Your feelings when you sat there after this, what went through your mind at this particular point?
I was just really nervous. I was kind of shaking at that point because, I'm on my own. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't speeding or anything. He was really concerned I was under the influence of something, which I was not, at all. I was just nervous.
Right. Okay. So you go home, and obviously your dad now enters the picture, and he's sitting there with you right now. I understand your dad's a mechanic, pretty well-known mechanic, by the way, in the area, by the way. So, Don, you now have your daughter come home. What was your reaction when she came home and told you about what had happened? Give us your thoughts.
Hi, Gary. Yeah, this is Neil.
Or Neil, I'm sorry. I said Don. Forgive me, Neil. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my wife and I had came home, and we were actually at my mother's house, my two daughters, my wife and myself, and they had left early. And it's not uncommon for Anita to let me know, I might say, hey, where are you headed or what are you up to? And she said, I'm just going to go for a drive. It's, I can think and listen to music. So when I had pulled in the driveway, both of my daughters were at the back of her car and, looking at something. And so I, asked what you guys are up to, and Anita explained that they were checking her lights. And I said, oh, okay. I said, is there, what's wrong with the lights? And there was nothing wrong with the lights. So as we came in the house and, she explained what had happened, I was a little taken back by that.
Right.
I was a little bit, and I said, well, you have the right to plead not guilty, and I suggest that that's what you do. I can't see that this is going to hold up in court. As far as I knew at that point, we were allowed to be operating our vehicles. We were allowed to be taking a drive. We were asked to, do our best to avoid social situations, avoid large groups, just be cautious. And I knew that some businesses were on a list that they were not allowed to be operating, and others were on the list. But that was kind of new to me to learn that we were not allowed to be out driving our cars. And to be honest, Gary, it raised a lot of questions within the house here and within our immediate family circle to say, well, are we allowed to be driving our cars or not? I didn't know at that point.
And again, go ahead.
Well, and from there, as Monday rolled around, and to Dave's point yesterday, I did listen to the show, and I do think it's important that we, stick to the facts and keep this straight, the truth of the matter. And so as Monday came, I thought, well,
Tuesday morning, it's 8:18. We're talking with Anita and Neil Shaffer. Anita, of course, the 19-year-old young lady who has attracted statewide attention and national attention through being stopped and being issued at that time, a week ago this past Sunday, the only citation for the stay-at-home order. And we're hearing different things about what's happening to that citation. Neil, I want to come back to you for a second here before we get back to Anita. Obviously, when you got home, you saw your daughters checking the back and the I guess it was a brake light that was supposed to be out. Was the brake light out? Was it working or was it not working? I've heard different stories on this.
No, it was working, Gary.
Okay. So the brake light was working. So the fact that he said it was not working, obviously, at least in the moment you saw it, it was. I would doubt that it had changed much in that moment either. So you get to Monday morning. You get the day after now. You've had a chance to kind of kick this around as a family. And your next thoughts, what came up next?
Well, I had called the state police barracks down in Loganville, and I had thought that perhaps, whoever may be in charge down there would want to know about this, because at this point, I didn't know if there were other citations being handed out.
Right.
Or, and what was going on here. And to be honest, in my opinion, it was kind of a violation of rights. We have certain liberties and rights as Americans to operate our vehicles, to go about life and to do things. So I called down and I explained why I was calling, and I was given to a corporal, I believe it was. and explained to him everything we had just talked about, explained to him the incident, gave him the incident number. And I was basically, he had said, well, you can be pulled over for, anything really, and I don't know if the tint on the car is a violation or not, if it's too dark or not. I don't know as far as the law stating that. So I explained all that, and I said in the end of the traffic stop, I said she was cited for going for a drive pursuant to the Disease Control and Prevention Act. Right. And I said, I didn't feel that was right. If there was a violation, you cite the law, you give the citation for the violation, and then we move on from here. And he said, well, I wasn't there, and, the officer is going to do what he sees fit to do at the time. And he said, actually, maybe he might have stopped her from going to a social event or something. And I thought to myself, well, we can't assume that she's going anywhere, and she wasn't going anywhere. She was on her way home. So that bothered me a little bit, Gary. I didn't get a whole lot of satisfaction. So I did call Stan Saylor's office. I talked to an associate of his, and I just said, hey, you might want to be aware of what's taking place. And he thanked me for that. Now, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit. The more I thought about this and the more I talked with Anita, I said, this is really, really going beyond, I think, what is justified. And I said, I think the people ought to know. I said, that's why I called Stan Saylor's office. I don't think that we ought to be treated as criminals just because we're driving our cars. And, I think it borders on harassment and a violation of some civil rights here. And as time went on, I got a phone call on Thursday, or a text, and I was tracked down by Jan Murphy of the Patriot News. Mm-hmm. And before we had spoken to her, now that's the only person I've spoken to, and Anita's spoken to before you. And I asked her, I said, well, how were you made aware of this? And she said, well, it's public knowledge. The citation is now public knowledge, and it's come through the Capitol building here, whatever avenues it goes through, and it's raised some eyebrows, or it's gotten some attention. And I think it might be worth, the people knowing this. And I said, well, I agree with that. So we did speak with her, and she did the first article there on Friday. Now, from there, Gary, my gosh, we had Fox 43 and CBS 27 and, wanting to pictures and interviews and things. And we had talked about it, and Anita agreed that, we're not trying to make a big scene out of this, and we're not trying to be anti-police, but I really thought that the lead officers would have wanted to know that this was going on, and even taking it as far as to the governor, and Kristen Phillips Hill, actually, I read in the article, had asked him for clarification, which I think we badly need. You can't just make a general statement and then everybody interprets it however they want, and now we have a citation like this.
Welcome back. WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton on a Tuesday morning. It's 8:34. We're with Anita and Neil Shaffer. Anita, of course, involved in what has now become a famous or infamous incident. And Neil, we're coming back to you here very quickly. This regarding, obviously, the traffic stop in Red Lion, and it became the only case as of that point of anyone who was cited or given a citation for the stay-at-home order the governor had issued here in the state of Pennsylvania. So, Neil, you were talking a little bit about you saw this as a violation of rights. What have you learned since? What have you and Anita learned since that incident a week ago this past Sunday? Where does everything stand right now?
Well, it seems to me, Gary, that the attention that it's gathered and the public opinion of it is that it was unwarranted, and I think the fact that it was the only one given, speaks some volume as well. Mm-hmm. And, my thought on it and Anita's thought was, when you have a situation like this, it's not just because it's my daughter, or it's not just, hey, it was me. The public needs to be aware if stuff like this is taking place. that, where do we stand as a community, and what are the rules under this order or under this decree that the governor's made? Where do we stand with this?
Well, and I think that's the point. And what I've heard from different people the last few days, and again, including the DA and other people, that we're not stopping people to issue stay-at-home orders. You can't stop somebody just to do that right now. Although we are seeing, the one thing that we are seeing here in the last week or so are policemen stopping people at borders, obviously for different reasons, because in New York, for example, people coming to Pennsylvania, or in Delaware, they're saying it. So there are things now where we are stopping people that have out-of-state licenses coming into state. So that is putting it on another level. And again, I think that's a little different situation than what we had here. I think for a lot of people, I guess and someone just wrote me a moment ago here that the governor's requested everybody stay home except at a necessary trip to the store, pharmacy, or doctor's office or medical center, that's what he's asking. And yet at the same time, I drive out, for example, to a place that I want to go take a walk. Or I'll drive out to a church service on Sunday where we sit in our cars and sit outside and hear through a public address thing with our pastor a sermon. So, that is something that I think, potentially, not that it's happening here among our state troopers right now or anything else in Pennsylvania in mass, because I think probably 99.9% of them would not have stopped you here. Let me ask you this question, Anita. Was this a younger trooper? Was it an older trooper? One you would say was, more toward your age, or somebody who was an older one?
He seemed younger. He wasn't my age young, but maybe around mid-20s, early 30s maybe. Okay.
All right. Was he nice to you in terms of the way he talked to you and the way he dealt with you?
For the most part, I would say so. He seemed a little aggressive at times, but he was decent to deal with.
Were you mannerly to him?
Yes, I was.
Okay. All right. Neil, we come back here for a moment, and I think one of the things that, and I've had some conversations with some people, in disagreement, by the way, the last couple of days, as you may have heard on the show yesterday, that I think one of the things that our officials have to do is, even though this is one person, and I think we hopefully are going to have this thing rescinded, but this is one person, and yet I think what our officials fail to recognize sometimes, who represent us, is that when everybody heard this story, they put themselves in your daughter's seat. Everyone is able to say, I just became Anita Shaffer. What would I do if I was in that situation? And is that taking this beyond where it was supposed to be? In other words, we have directives coming out, and yet we have our same people, the governor, the secretary of health, saying you can go out, you can walk in a park, you can, and obviously if you want to walk in a park and you don't have one that you're living in there, you've got to drive to that. So do you think we've been unclear in terms of how we put this out there in terms of the law, and thus it's been unclear as to how to enforce it? I'm asking you a question here. Maybe you have an opinion on it, maybe you don't, but I'll throw it to you anyway.
Well, I think it has been unclear. And to your point, Gary, just Sunday as I was out doing some things, I see that from what I see in the local community here, everybody's doing their best. There's some fast food places open. There's pizza being delivered. There's,
right.
You're stopping at the door. But as I looked around on Sunday, I saw a vehicle with student driver marked on it, and I was happy to see that person out driving. And I see motorcycles out as they're out enjoying their motorcycles and going for a drive. So, and Anita and I also talked about that. She said, well, I guess if I would have said that I was going to the store, that maybe, I wouldn't have this. And I said, well,
right.
You answered honestly. And I assured her and encouraged her that, when you answer honestly like that, you've done nothing wrong.
Right.
In my opinion, you're just driving your car, you're thinking, you're listening to some music, and I think a lot of people do that. I think if you're off work, unfortunately, if you're unable to work at this point, due to a shutdown or something, I think you may at some point say, hey, I just might go drive and look at the beauty of things and, just get out of the house for a few minutes.
Well, I like to go to go for a walk, for example, down along the Cadorus Creek. There's a nice trail down there, and I can walk back inside the creek, places I've never been before, but I have to drive to get there. And so, again, I think the state police have given some clarification and said, we, at least on the local level, I haven't heard on the state level yet, but on the local level, state troopers have said, we kind of had this guy go back and reread how the directive is supposed to be applied. And I did say yesterday that I imagine most state police who have any modicum of experience probably sat back and said, this isn't how this should maybe be taken down. So I think the idea that we only have had one of these kind of incidences here in the state of Pennsylvania, we've had a couple other ones, but they've been in different kind of situations, that we've only had one of these is probably a good thing. And yet at the same time, as I said, everybody put themselves in the seat of your daughter, and we tend to jump out to conclusions and perceptions. I'm sure you've thought about that, Anita, and I'm sure you've thought about that, Don. Obviously we don't want to send the perception that you should somehow not trust the police overall. Anita, what do you take away from this experience? Now, go ahead, Anita.
I'm not really sure. I mean, just if it's okay to go out for a walk or, I see some people talking about how they're taking trips out to Walmart just to kind of get out of the house, not really looking to buy anything or anything. And I'm not saying that's bad or, just why can't I go for a drive? I wasn't even planning to get out of the car.
Right.
That's really my only takeaway from it.
Neil, how about you? We have about 24 seconds left here in this segment, and if we can keep your one more, we're going to do that. But what's your takeaway?
Well, and Gary, if, we're all entitled to mistakes, and if he is a young new hire or a young officer, I don't know. We're all entitled to a mistake or a bad judgment call. But I think on the governor's level, there needs to be clarification, and I think to get it out there, to have the people say, hey, I don't want to be dealing with this, is the positive note of it, that, it might stop some further misunderstanding of what's been said.
This morning, our final segment, and we really appreciate Neil and Anita Shaffer joining us this morning. Anita, of course, the young lady who was involved in the traffic stop that yielded the first citation, violation of the stay-at-home order from the governor. So I guess I want to ask both of you, Anita, have you been notified at this point that is it still standing right now, the citation, or has it been rescinded at this point? Can you give us any updated information?
As far as I know, it still stands.
Okay, still stands. And this was a little over a $200 fine, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Neil, have you heard any information yet that it has been rescinded or taken away at this particular point?
No, Gary. The first I heard that was yesterday, that there was a chance of it. And to clarify the amount, I printed out, the law on this, and it says that the fine can be anywhere from $25 up to, but not to exceed $300 together with costs, and a jail time not to exceed 30 days, I guess, if you would not show up before a judge. Right. I think that the $200 fine was something that was calculated, if you would think about the fees that would be involved, and perhaps taking, a shot at somewhere in the middle, that it could potentially be, yes, $200. It could potentially be as much as $300. But we're confident that to go before the magistrate that this would be found as a not guilty, and that's how she pleaded.
Okay.
But no, we've not been contacted by anybody, Gary, as far as it being rescinded or any further conversation or anything.
Final thing here. This has become a national story. Anita, I don't suspect when you took your drive that Sunday that you ever thought that this would be a national story. And so how do you put this in perspective? Because obviously we're in a time where we're all in this together. We've heard that a lot. we're obviously in a time where we want to respect our police community because they do a great job here in the state of Pennsylvania. I think we have great state troopers. And, you know, I think the concern by some of them and some of the people out there in law enforcement, Neil and Anita, is that people are going to be flippant with them or be taking photographs of them or, you know, not treating them with the respect. Neil, what would you say to people going forward from here based on the case with your daughter and yet at the same time that being the only case in Pennsylvania? Where would you take this from here? About a minute and a half left.
Well, I would hope that, you know, as Stan had said yesterday on the show, you know, respect is something that's earned. Respect is something that is reciprocating. In other words, you know, if you give respect, you get respect. I believe that the police certainly have a tough job to do. Oftentimes, there's going to be criticism no matter what decision they make. I really think, though, as a servant, as to protect and serve, and as a public servant, that you know they would understand, you know, procedure and the rights of folks and certain liberties that we enjoy as Americans, and respect those. And as Anita had stated, Gary, it was never a case where the officer was, you know, physical or anything of that nature.
Sure.
However, you know, I do hope that, you know, with the public attention to this and the feeling that it may have been a little bit over the top, a little bit too much, you know, that they would take the proper steps to either, you know, evaluate this particular officer, just staying narrow here, you know, and talk with him, educate him, and, you know, make sure that there's an understanding there. But I don't think it should be an open door to be ignorant with police by any means.
Couldn't agree with you more, Neil. That's probably a great way to end this today. I really appreciate it, Anita, for you to take the time this morning, and Neil, you also, to explain this. We thank you, and I hope you'll be hearing from someone soon about this being rescinded. They have a chance to correct what looks to most of us to be a mistake in this instance. Thank you very much for both of you being with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.